Hello arty peoples and welcome to another episode of Jerry's Live. My name is Emmy Klein and I am your host this evening, and today I have a fun class planned for us. We're going to be doing an acrylic paint along, and before I jump into all of that though, if you guys are interested in all the items that I'm using on the show today, make sure to go to the website JerrysArtarama.com and in the search bar type in today's class code, which is JL240, which I believe is actually right here on the screen, and it will remain there for the whole class. So if you guys actually want to go check those out, please do so. But today, like I said, we're going to be doing an acrylic paint along, and I was feeling a bit nostalgic, so I wanted to paint a kind of a sunsetty scene of a swamp because I'm from Florida, and this was a view that was kind of very all over my hometown. So ironically enough though, this picture was taken, I got it from, was it Unsplash or Pixabay? I think it's Unsplash. I believe it's Unsplash. Those are the two websites that I like to go to for my royalty-free images, just so when I do paint pictures, I don't have anybody coming after me legally. So if you guys are looking for reference photos, that's a great place to go. And I know my moderators, Amanda and Frida, are going to put the link in the chats for you guys to check out. Also, if you guys want to pull up that image, just so you have it, you know, to be looking at while we do this class. Where this was actually taken by somebody who uploaded it there, and this was actually the Okefenokee swamp. And in case you guys are wondering, this is how it's spelled. Lot of vowels. This is actually a swamp that borders the Georgia-Florida line, so it's actually nowhere near my hometown. But this is something that is, as soon as I saw it, I felt the need to paint it, just because there's so many pretty colors. Ironically enough, now my hair matches the picture. So I guess maybe I'm biased. But we are going to start off with using the LUKAS Acrylics, and I actually wanted to go through the colors that I'm using. You can use whatever you have on hand, but these are the ones that I decided to use just because they worked really well for this image. So as I'm telling you the colors, I'm going to actually get them off my table to kind of get them out of the way. But I'm using a titanium white, a cadmium yellow light. This is the cadmium yellow deep, which is also, if you guys have like an Indian yellow, that would be very similar as well. This is mauve, which I love this color so much. This is the cobalt blue. Then I have my burnt sienna, which is a staple in my colors. I usually 9 times out of 10 have this in my artwork. And then I have just for a little bit more of a yellowy tinge to like a kind of a brown neutral color, the gold ochre, which I'm actually not going to pull off of my table just yet because I wanted to show you guys how I have prepared my acrylics over here. Now I'm also going to in the teacher's cart, I do have iron oxide black. I ironically enough thought I had an iron oxide black. I didn't double check. This is deep black, so any black color will do, but I happen to be using the deep black, just FYI. And then we're also going to be mixing it with the satin glazing liquid. So here is my palette, and I have all of my colors already laid out on my palette, and they're already mixed up with my glazing liquid. So I wanted to kind of show you guys how I did that. Let me actually pull my bucket of water out of the way so I can show you guys how to do this, and you guys can be prepared while I'm going over all of our other items, and you guys can be mixing your paints, getting it ready. Okay, so I have the gold ochre is the last color I have left to put on my palette, and as you can see, my palette is rather large. The reason why is because I'm working pretty large, and I have really big puddles of paint, so I wanted a lot of space. So I have a blob of paint. Again, gold ochre, and then I take my satin glazing liquid. Make sure it's closed before you do this. Put your finger over the top. You can also put a rag over top of that and then put your finger over. Give it a good shake just to make sure that it's nice and mixed up. And I always open it away from my face just in case it kind of splurts out a little bit. You don't want that getting in your face. But then I do a good drizzle on top. you know? This is about kind of how it looks every time. Take a palette knife and just mix it together. Kind of like we're making a fun color of icing. We just want to fully incorporate it. So I'm going to also take my palette knife and really mix it up together. Scrape it, move it around, and apparently get it on my palette or on my my board there. It's okay. I'm not upset with that. I can actually pull that right back off. But if you can see there are little swirls of color, and that means it's not fully incorporated. And I'm actually, before I get too far, I'm gonna make a bigger mess, apparently. Excuse me. It's okay. Because that glazing liquid is there, I can actually take my Easy Wiper rag, because you guys know I love these. Just a cotton rag, kind of get it up. It's not a big deal. That's actually where that color is going to end up anyway. So I'm going to continue to mix this, fully incorporate it. Now the reason why I'm using that satin glazing liquid is because not only is it going to thin my acrylics down and kind of make it a nice transparent kind of color, it also is a drying retarder, which helps me tremendously when I'm mixing my colors and trying to blend them and transition from one color to another. So if you guys are working with acrylics and you're having a really hard time trying to get a nice gradient and a transition, use your mediums. Your mediums are going to help you tremendously. So that is why I'm using that satin glazing liquid. So that is nice and mixed up. And now I have all of my colors and still some space to kind of mix my colors together. But I'm going to pop this over here. Get my golden ochre out of the way. So I'm going to actually take this and put it off to the side, but before I do that, I also wanted to show you, I have our painter's color diary here, where when I was picking my colors for this painting, this is kind of how I do it. So I have a titanium white, cadmium yellow, all of the colors I essentially listed off. And on the left-hand side, I have what's called a mass tone, so straight out of the bottle without mixing it too much, and I just kind of wanted to have a little bit of an area to see how opaque that is. So you can see the mass tone on most of these colors it's not that opaque. So most of these are on the transparent kind of a side, so that's going to also help me get that transition and kind of blend my colors together, because we're going to be glazing a lot throughout this whole process. But I did want to also see kind of how they tint down. So these are all the colors, with the exception of titanium white, mixed with the titanium white. So that's also kind of, each color kind of travels down. I also wanted to see what would happen if I add cobalt, the cobalt blue, to all of these colors. So that yellow gave me a really good green. That cadmium yellow deep gave me a really lovely kind of more earthy green. So it's a little bit more neutral, because that orange and blue are opposite of the color wheel, so it kind of brought it back to more of a neutral. But then I also wanted to see how it looks when I add the mauve to all of the different colors, which is going to be key, because as we transition through this painting, you're going to see that kind of come into play. You're also going to see this really lovely dark purple happen. So that is where I kind of picked my colors. So I'm going to actually get this off the table as well, because we have a big painting and limited space. So I'm going to pop this over here. And I'm using the Da Vinci Ultra Smooth panel. It does have a 3/4 of an inch cradle. So if you wanted to save this raw wood here and maybe stain it after you're done, now would be a good time to tape it. I really like to, you see how you can see the difference between that cradle and the board? I usually tape it just up into the board, and then I paint a little bit over that edge. But I'm not really going to save the edges. You can also paint them at the end if you want to paint them like a solid black or whatever. If you frame this, you don't have to worry about it at all. So I'm going to have my reference photo right here. I'm working 14 by 18. You guys can actually use whatever size you want. But I just kind of wanted to make sure that it was still the same kind of a ratio, so like 11 by 14 or 12 by 16 are also good. The ratios are slightly off at that point, but it's not so far that it's going to be really noticeable. So if you guys do want to work smaller, you absolutely can. Now, besides a palette knife where I was just using it to mix my colors, and I hope you guys are mixing because you better get ready to start painting, because once we start, we gotta go. But I also have a Mimic Kolinsky Mottler brush. So this is 2 inches wide. This is going to help me get my very, very base layer down to get a nice transition and gradient all across my board. I want to work with a really large brush just so we have a nice blending kind of a thing, because if you're going to sit there and try and paint this whole board with a tiny, tiny little brush like this, you're going to be fighting it. You're going to get streaks, so this is how I kind of avoid those streaks, use a bigger brush. So besides that, I do have a variety of other brushes with the Black Swan, excuse me, the Black Swan brushes. I'm using the long handle just because I happen to be on camera and it's a little bit easier for me to paint at this kind of a angle with the long handle brush and not get my head into the shot for you guys. But if you want to use a short handle brush, that's okay. Whatever is the most comfortable for you. But I want you guys, when you're doing this, to experiment with the different styles of brush. So I have a flat, I have a filbert, I have an angle, I have a fan, and I have a round. So I have a variety of different brush shapes and sizes because I want you to kind of see what each brush can do. They're different tools and you gotta kind of experiment with them to see what works for you. I know what works for me, but I want you guys to play with that, you know? But for the very first initial stage, I do have a visual, so you guys kind of understand where we're going. This is what we are going to start with. We're going to do this gradient right now because as you can see in our reference photo, it gets a little bit bluer up here in this corner. It's a little bit, maybe not as purple as I had made it. I kind of punch up. I tend to punch up the saturation levels in my paintings, but that's just me. You can tone it down a little bit if you want, but it gets a little bit lighter than it does over here, and then it kind of transitions down into that orange and that yellow, and then right here where the sun kind of peeks through those cypress trees, it's the bright, bright white. But that's what I really, really loved about this image, especially those cypress trees. It just makes me feel like home, you know? So as you can see, my transition, it's not perfect, which is okay. It is a painting. I want it to look like a painting. I don't want it to look like a photograph. I can print off the photograph. I want a painting. So I'm gonna see brush strokes, I'm gonna see transitions, and it's not gonna be absolutely perfect, and that's beautiful. Because when we start painting those trees, any of those weird little transitions that you're kind of fighting with, it's probably gonna be covered. So we can hide it. No one's gonna know. How would they know? So I'm going to put actually my gradient here, and I'm going to actually pop my reference photo down just so I don't mess it up. All right, are we ready, guys? I hope we're ready. So I also have, just in case you guys are wondering, I have 2 different buckets of water. This is what I use for my smaller brushes because it's those ridges on the bottom of that bucket really help me knock off the water. But when it comes to my Mottler brushes, and this is my adorable little Jerry's bucket. When it comes to the Mottler, I actually prefer a bigger kind of area to clean my brush off. Also, I'm gonna have a lot of paint in this brush, so I don't wanna get it in my clean water for when I'm doing the next stage. Although, if you guys are, we're gonna have to make sure that this first layer dries, so you can always switch out your water. So I'm gonna actually get my brush just a little wet, not sopping wet, just a little damp. And we are gonna start with this cobalt blue. And actually, let me try and keep the mixing right here. And a touch of that mauve. So we're gonna kind of keep it on the blue side. And then we're going to actually start transitioning over. I want a little bit more blue than that. And I'm gonna start in this corner I'm gonna go over and then I'm gonna work my way down, okay? So this is where we are just laying down color. And the cool part is that if you absolutely don't like what you're doing, you can paint over it. You can do this again. I need a lot more paint on my brush. All right, so gets blue in that corner, and then I'm going to transition over here to that mauve. Mauve. Did I say mauve or mauve? I feel like that's potato, right?
I say mauve? No, I don't
Mauve.
know.
Huh? You second guess yourself a little bit, don't you?
MJ Pete said it's more like mauve.
Mauve.
That's how he said that.
Mauve. I like it. All right, so I got my purples, and I'm going to actually pull in some of that cadmium yellow deep. This is cadmium yellow deep and just a touch of the white. So I want to have the cadmium yellow deep, and I still have that blue on my brush, so it's okay. And actually, let me pull this over so you guys can see. I have a glare on my palette here, so I'm sorry. It's kind of giving me a brown color, so I want to actually pull in a little bit more of that mauve. So it kind of has that more kind of purpley tone to it. And remember, I put a drying retarder into this, so this is still wet. But we still need to work kind of on the fast side, right? Because it is acrylics and it's going to dry. And once it starts drying, if you feel like it's starting to get a little tacky, leave it alone. If it starts getting a little like funky on you, you definitely don't want to keep working into it. So now I have more of the cadmium yellow deep and the white. And again, I'm just kind of working off of this puddle, like this little puddle of paint, and I'm just tinting it slowly. And I am going back and forth, just starting to kind of lay that color down before I start going up into that other color and pulling them back together as a transition. And you notice I'm going this way. So it's not perfectly straight across. I'm kind of giving it a bit of an arch. And then I'm going to actually add in more of that orange, or well, it's not orange, it's cadmium yellow light, or cadmium yellow deep, sorry. Just to kind of transition down into that orangey kind of area, which, as you can see, a little different from the time that I did it before. Every time I've painted this, it's slightly different. So let me actually try to make it a little bit more accurate. I'm gonna add in more of that white because I really like this gradient that I got going on. Right. All right, now I'm going to add in more of that cadmium yellow deep. Now, I'm not really going to worry about where my light is right this second, because I'm really worried about that transition from the purples to the yellows down to that burnt sienna. Just trying to get that sort of kind of gradient going. All right, so I'm gonna add more white to this cadmium yellow deep. And now I'm gonna bring in some of that cadmium yellow light. So it's a little bit more of a bright yellow like we all think of. All right, so before I get too far down, now I'm going to start worrying about where my light source is. So I'm going to say it's about here-ish. So it's not perfectly center, it's slightly more to the right, and it's about a third of the way up from the bottom, right? Right about there.
If you're Sorry,
No,
if
you're
your
fine.
paint on your palette starts getting tacky, would you be able to spray it with water to keep using it, or would you just need to like start over?
You can spritz it with a little bit of water, but that's why I'm using the drying retarder, because all of my paint on my palette, I've actually mixed those right before we started going live, and they're still all wet. So that's why I like the drying retarder, and I use it a lot for when I'm doing these transitions. Now, if you're having a hard time because you don't have any of those mediums, yes, spritz it with water. You know, try to make sure that it's still kind of remaining wet for you, you know? All right, now when I'm blending around, because this is kind of becoming a circle, right? I'm blending around, and so I know this side of my brush is touching the lighter side. This side is touching the kind of more yellowy side. I will continue to keep my brush in that same kind of orientation because if I were to do this and then flip my brush over and flip those sides, this is going to be the darker yellow, and now I'm going to put that into that brighter area. So I'm trying to remain kind of aware of where that kind of lighter tone is. And I'm going to get real orange with it. Which, again, if I'm saying orange, I mean the cadmium yellow deep. I'm going to actually push this a little bit. It's got an orangey tinge, you know. I can feel up here it's getting a little tacky, so I don't want to go into that area. But I do want to actually get a little bit of that cadmium yellow light. Kind of touch it in here and just lightly. So I'm actually very lightly just brushing kind of the surface of the backside of this. So I'm not going straight up and down. I'm kind of just dragging my brush through this. Really, really light touches.
Lisa on YouTube says it looks like the one on the left has more white in it.
It does. It absolutely does. You are correct.
Is that on purpose, or are you planning on adding more white to the one you're working with now?
It's not on purpose. I actually did this a couple weeks ago. So, and this is kind of the fun aspect of doing the same painting over and over again. You know, even if I'm painting the same thing, I'm going to do it in slightly different ways. So even though it's the same image, and I meant to do that, I just happened to not put as much white in there. So if you guys like that, add more white. You are absolutely correct though. So I have my burnt sienna and titanium white. This is actually a little bit lighter than I want, so let me add in more of that. And it's a little not as orange as I want it, so I'm gonna add in a little bit of that cadmium yellow deep as well, just to kind of transition. So this area is where it's starting to get a little bit darker. Hopefully, sorry, there's a bit of a gradient here. You guys can kind of see it there if I tilt it sideways. The lights, if we didn't have as many lights in here, you guys would not be able to see me. So I'm gonna actually go straight in with burnt sienna now and kind of touch that in. Get a little bit of the, sorry, I'm just trying to get the pigment off of my brush here. And then I'm going in with this brush, mostly clean. Let me actually go back into that orange, just so I have it on my brush. Kind of blend that out. Again, I have more of the yellow side on this side of my brush, and then more of that burnt sienna on that side of my brush, so I'm trying to make sure that it's kind of consistent around this darker shape that I have going.
Did you said you used the drying retarder on the one on the left as well?
Yes, I actually did same colors, same process. I just happened to add more titanium white. So over here, now if you guys can see this, I'm getting more of a brush stroke here. I'm trying to make sure that glare isn't quite there. Yeah, sorry. I'm getting a little bit more of texture there. That means up here is getting dry, so I'm not really going to go into that area, but I still need to add in this darker color and kind of blend it out a little. So let me get a little bit more of that cadmium yellow deep mixture and just lightly touch that. And again, if I have brush strokes visible, I'm not mad about it. It's a painting. It's gonna have brush strokes. So I have my golden ochre now. I just dipped into the golden ochre, and that's all I have. And I'm gonna just touch it on the corners here. So I have a little bit more of a, it's like almost like an olivey green kind of a yellow, you know? Actually, let me drag it across the bottom here just to make it a little bit darker. All right.
And you're using a watercolor modeler right now, but you wouldn't go and use that for watercolor later.
No, I will not. That is now my acrylic modeler. And that's the thing, is that technically speaking, it is made for watercolors, but it works really well for me to have as an acrylic brush. And I absolutely love it when it comes to transitions in acrylics. Oh, and I got some water right here, sorry. Ignore that. This is why I usually wash my brushes away from my painting. And that's okay, because at this stage, I'm gonna let this fully dry, and then I would actually go over this again, because I wanna make sure I get a good base down. For this one right here, I actually went over it twice. So I did this transition 2 times. Now, I'm not gonna do it on here because we simply don't have time as much as I want to. But at this stage, you need to let this fully dry. If you wanna hit it with an acrylic, if you wanna hit it with a hair dryer just to get it to dry a little faster, you can. But otherwise, you can take a break, go walk your dog, you know, get a snack. Who doesn't love a snack? But make sure you wash your brush before you walk away from this, because even though this is a watercolor brush, those acrylics are going to dry in the bristles and you will destroy this brush so fast. So yes, this is a watercolor brush, but it's soft and it gives me really great gradients with my acrylics, you know?
I use those brushes for all kinds of things.
I feel like you use it for makeup too.
No,
No?
not that one. Other ones, yes.
Watercolor brushes are fantastic for makeup.
Those are some of my favorite for the wash too.
Mm-hmm. All right, so as you can see, this is how dirty my water got just from that one brush alone. So this is why I have 2 buckets. And you would want to probably clean your bucket of water before you continue. But at this stage, you can see I have a lot of brush strokes visible. I would absolutely go over this a second time in the exact same way. And if there is something that I didn't like about this, like I didn't like how dark it really got right here. It doesn't seem like a very good transition from this area to here. I might actually want to bring that up to this area, kind of more of an orangey purple. And then I will, you know, fix anything like that, add more white to this area. So that would be the stage where I would do that. But we have got to keep going, and somehow I got paint all over my hand. It's okay. I have an easy wiper. That's all right. It's a painting show. All right, so I'm gonna put this down here so where it can dry and I can finish it later. And now we go in for the good stuff. So I'm gonna actually continue on with this panel. As you can see, yes, you were very right. I put way more white down in here than I did in my other one. But I am still going to use the same petals of paint. So let me grab my brushes. So like I said, I have a varying different, you know, brush styles. you know, all the different shapes that I, you know, just happen to grab. I will tell you right now, I'm not using the fan. If the fan works for you, great. It does not work for me. And I'm not going to struggle with a fan brush. I'm not Bob Ross. Yes, we have a question?
A question from YouTube. When you went back over it for the second time, did you use the same colors or did you use like lighter versions of those colors?
And that's where I was saying that second time that you do the transition, you can either use the same colors or you can slightly change it. So I placed them in the same areas. So this was my cobalt blue with my mauve. And as you can see, I'm pretty sure I added white to that just to kind of lighten that value down. Over here, I believe, is actually a mauve with a little bit of that cadmium yellow deep. I think that's what that is. Again, I do apologize. I did this weeks ago. But yes, I still use the same colors. And so you can see that transition of where I got this mixture. I added a little bit more of that cadmium yellow deep and definitely some titanium white to just get it down. So if I had already established that in that very first kind of layer, I would have just left it the exact same. But if I don't like it and I believe that it got a little too dark in areas, I would fix it at that stage. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. All right, so as you can see, I printed my reference photo the exact same size as my panel. This is kind of my cheat for when I need to kind of place things really fast. And actually, you know what? I'm going to use my round brush first. So if I need to, I can put my finger here, take my reference photo off, and that's where something is placed. I can absolutely tell you that that's where my brightest white is, but if I want to, I can also say this is where the bottom of that cypress tree is. See how that works? So easy. But I'm gonna actually go in for my first couple of layers of trees, and you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna actually say right about here is where I'm gonna start. So you see where the trees in the foreground are just super dark, and then as you go back, they kind of blend back in. All of these right here, I'm going to start with that kind of an orangey tree situation going on there. So I'm gonna put my finger here, and that's where it is, right there. So I have cadmium yellow deep, that very orange kind of color on my brush. And so I'm going to kind of place it, and if I need to, I can also measure how big this is, and my tree is about that big. And I'm using a round brush, so I can almost use this like drawing. And the very, very, very cool thing about doing a landscape with nature is that everything is an organic shape, and if it's slightly off from the reference photo, who's gonna know? So I am right now honestly drawing a stick, right? And then it kind of has a little bit of foliage down here. So I'm just dabbing, right? And then with my round brush, this is why I love this brush. And actually, maybe if we switch to that side camera, you guys can really see this. I feel like that would be, it's hard to see because it's orange. And that's why I'm starting with the cadmium yellow deep, is because if I don't love that, it's not that visible, right? So I can actually take this and take the tip of my brush and kind of dot in that foliage. And it doesn't actually have to connect for your brain to go, oh, that's a bush. That's like a bushy kind of plant, right? And then if I absolutely hate something, so say I put in a little tree here and I don't like that, take my easy wiper and a little bit of water on there. So it's a wet easy wiper. Erased, like it never happened. So, and I also have a hair in there. If I work fast enough, if I place something and I don't like it, if I accidentally drop my paintbrush, there's some other hair, sorry. If I accidentally drop my paintbrush and get a blob of orange up here somewhere, I can wipe it off with my Easy Wiper rag and a little bit of water. This is kind of a way to erase your paints without making it fully permanent. And that's why you really want to make sure that this gradient layer is fully dry. So that's how we're going to kind of get those shapes without a whole lot of stress. So now I'm going to add in a couple of kind of, it's a blob of paint, but it's going to act like tree branches, right? And then there's a little bit of a tree branch over here. And again, I'm just kind of blobbing in really just weird shapes that look kind of similar to what's happening in the photo. There's a little bit there, and then there's a big blob of shape over here. Right? Now, as we get further and further over this direction, I'm gonna start adding in burnt sienna. So down here at the bottom of this, it's actually quite burnt sienna. It's that darker kind of an orangey tinge, right? So I'm gonna actually start darkening this. And you're going to slowly build up your layers like this. Now that's why I like to use that orange as kind of my placement layer as well. Because if I don't fully paint over the orange, it still looks like that sunshine is hitting that tree branch and almost making it glow a little bit. All right, so as I'm doing this, because I'm honestly going to just start popping in a little bit of these, burnt sienna and orangey tones just to kind of build up my shapes. If you guys, have any questions at this point, feel free to ask. Also, if you are trying to do moss, because moss is huge in Florida and it's everywhere, what I like to do is actually take my brush and in a kind of a blob of paint that I've already laid down for the like tree branch right here, I kind of just lightly drag it down. It's actually no longer wet. Let's do this. Okay. And now it looks like there's hanging moss. Just a little flick of the paintbrush. Now, actually, I'm using the wrong bucket. Let me get this over here. I'm going to get rid of this round brush and I'm going to use my angled brush just for something a little different. But I'm going to stick with that burnt sienna color just so I can kind of build up these trees a little bit faster for you guys. This one I like because the angle brush, where it's kind of longer on the one side, I usually use that almost like a drawing tool. And my horizon line is right about here, where a lot of my trees are. Again, it does not have to be perfect. We're just kind of placing organic shapes. And then I will say, I'll get this off of here. If I need to, I can also use my brush to measure. So this tree right here is about the same length as my brush. And it's at a slight angle, but it's not perfectly straight. So it's about right there, right? So I'm going to start my tree. Hold on, I have that right about there. Right about here-ish. And I'm gonna draw a not so straight line. and it's perfect. Cypress trees are not perfect. They're very wonky looking trees. They also dye the water a really funny color. If you've ever been around a cypress tree. The bottom is also a lot chunkier than the actual, what is the tree trunk? That's the word I was looking for. Y'all know I struggle with words. All right, so I'm gonna actually, the funny thing also with cypress trees is that they're real thick at the bottom, and then they're like the same width almost all the way to the very top. So if you draw it similar like that, it's going to look absolutely correct, but they don't get real fat or have a very perfect transition from like top to bottom. It's mostly the same width, and they're just weird shapes, really. So now I can add a little bit of foliage.
Well, now we want to know what color they dye the water.
Oh, they act a lot like tea does. So, I mean, again, if this is like my serious childhood memories is, cause we always swam in all the lakes and everything. Cause I'm from like the Orlando area, a lot of lakes everywhere. And so, if you go to a Florida lake, it's brown. The water is like dark brown. It's almost like this color right here, like
So
it,
not an
but
exciting color.
darker. So, and if you put your hand in the water and just push it down just slightly, maybe 5 inches of water, and you lost complete visibility. It's like swimming in tea. It really is. So, most people find it gross. I find it nostalgic. So, my Floridians, swimming in that gross water. Unless you're in a spring, because then it's crystal clear and it's beautiful. All right, so there's a lot of like foliage right here, but all I'm looking at, sorry, let me get that glare off. All I'm looking at is that overall kind of shape, right? And I know that there's some areas that I can leave open. So I'm gonna try to hit that kind of overall shape, and I'm not gonna fully paint it in. And there's also a tree branch right here that looks like it's broken, but it's hanging on because of the moss, which it does that as well. There's definitely some moss hanging. So I'm gonna take, again, I'm gonna take my, my brush and kind of place it and then flick it down, not that far, obviously, just a little bit to make it kind of indicate moss. Because there's seriously moss everywhere. And the cool thing is because we added that drying retarder and also glazing medium, you can build up those dark layers. So even though I didn't actually fully give like a solid, coat to that, there are some areas that are a little bit thicker, so it makes it darker. There's some areas that are a little bit thinner, so that makes it lighter, and it gives it kind of more of that, kind of builds up your kind of different textures that are there. All right, so we hopefully can get to a couple of these trees because I wanted to get to these right here. So
We're all just watching and thinking about how dreamy this whole situation you've created is.
I'm glad you guys enjoyed this. Now, again, might not be perfect, but this is my Florida swamp. It might not actually be what's in this picture, but this is mine. All right, so tall, skinny, weird tree, right? And then I'm gonna kind of give it a chunky base because that's what it's got. Then there's also some bushes down here. So again, I'm just gonna blob in some color. Now, as I'm moving further this way, instead of using that burnt sienna, I'm gonna actually take a little bit of that cobalt blue. I'm gonna actually mix it right here so you guys can see. And my burnt sienna. And make a darker, get a little bit more cobalt blue, a darker kind of neutral color. So let me make sure that you guys can see this, right? Glare, there's a glare, sorry. So it's giving me a kind of a bluish neutral, but it is dark. So as I'm going further over this way, I'm going to actually add in more of those tones. So I'm kind of almost doing my trees as a gradient as well. And again, you can actually place these trees with the burnt sienna and then layer back in with this color as well, just to kind of darken it. Right? Now, the cool thing is, in this area, you can't really see the bottom of the trees because there's this huge bush right here. So I'm not going to worry about that. Not at all. Because I'm going to cover it up. So there's no point in painting it, right? But there's a lot of different shapes in here. Maybe some moss hanging. I'm going to actually have that transition of this color kind of coming in. Maybe I also darken just this side of my tree to where it kind of makes a little bit sense of how it's kind of getting darker and darker as we move further away from that light. Also, this color mixture right here, I could even add in a little bit of that mauve to make it a little bit more purpley for like my tree branches up here. And again, all I'm doing is dabbing in color. Tree shapes. Right? Looks like a tree. I mean, a floating tree, but it's there. And
So
maybe
you used more transparent colors for those first trees because they were closer to the light source, so you wanted them to show that they were in the background?
what's funny is that this is as transparent as this. It's just a lighter value of color. And yes, I use that right here because it is absolutely closer to that light source. So the closer you get to that light source, the more that light is actually moving around your object and making it almost appear as a lighter color. With the exception of this big chunky tree, which I will lay in. Let me do that right now. So there's also a kind of a tree stump that's broken here-ish. And I'm using the same color as I did up here, just because it's a darker value, and I'm just placing them for right now. Get a little bit more mixed up here, because I'm going to be trying not to run out of time for you guys. But I'm going to say it's probably, bottom of my tree is here-ish. Right?
What did you say the dark color you were using was? The brown?
This up here?
Mm-hmm.
It is a combination of the cobalt blue, burnt sienna, and a touch of mauve. So kind of that purple kind of warms it up a little bit, because that purple still leans more towards red. All right, so this actually goes, if I need to, again, I can place the top of my tree is right here, right? And it pretty much goes straight down. And I'm also, if you see that, that's what that awful noise is. I'm using my pinky like this as a guide to keep my hand nice and straight. So again, make sure your bottom layer is dry, but that's how I get that really nice straight line. And again, well, it's not perfectly straight, but that's how I get a, you know, terrible noise coming off my hand. But that's how I kind of keep my hand a little steady. If you're working at an easel, a really great tool to use is a mall stick. I always forget the name of that, but those are really, really awesome. And I'm gonna mix up some more of this color here because I am running out of it. So there we go. Now this first layer of my tree is going to be on the streaky side. That's okay, because I am going to actually have to build up the darkness of this, because again, all of my paints right now are extremely transparent, so it's not that solid and opaque. Now if you want to jump straight in with an opaque color, go for it. It's a great way to kind of knock it out really fast. I like to build up those layers just because I feel like it gives it almost like a glow around the edges a little bit, because my edges, I might miss a little bit here and there. So if I do, that's okay, right? And then I'm going to continue to build my tree shapes just like this. Now, before I jump to the next quick stage, because I hope we're not running out of time, I wanted to quickly address kind of the water area. So as you can see with my tree here, it's got a lot of water. Oh, there's a glare again. There's a lot of water because this is all water over here. So I need to kind of indicate that, but that's a reflection of that tree. So what I tend to do is kind of touch in that color. And this is why I usually build up those kind of areas, because there's a lot of dark right here, but I'm not too worried about making it perfect, right? Because if I need to, I can go back in with a little bit of this. And no, I have not cleaned my brush, by the way, super dirty, and that's okay. I have that cadmium yellow deep, right? And get a little bit of white and make mud. Beautiful, beautiful mud, and get a little bit of that mixture too, why not? And then I'm going to add in all of these weird like little floaty bits that are all throughout the water. And actually, it's a little bit more orange than that. So let's get that and maybe a little bit of that burnt sienna. And so if you start to lay down something and you realize that it's the wrong color, just stop, and if you want, you can wipe it off with a rag, or you can just go back over top of it and pretend like it never happened. Right? So as I build up my layers, again, I'm just kind of dabbing on color here and there. I know the brushes very, very well, so I am very familiar with how they kind of work for me. If you are not familiar, use your palette here and kind of play around with brush strokes before you start this, and really kind of build up what your hand feel for the brush. That way it can kind of work best for you. Now, unfortunately, I would keep painting on this, but we are going to so run out of time, so I'm going to just movie magic this. And ta-da! This is a lot of layers. A lot of painting. A lot of those tree branches right there were done with either this angled brush where I keep it nice and sharp, because I pull my brush while I'm using loading my brush on a palette. I tend to pull it on the flat side to where it's nice and sharp this way, so I can kind of drag my brush through and make all the different branches. Or if what works best for you is a round brush, go ahead and do that. I've also used the filbert and the flat brush just like I do this angle brush. But I started building up my layers, and as you can see here, I've done probably four coats of that same color that I mixed over here. But when I got to this stage, I was like, I feel like it might not be dark enough, and that's okay because I have my black acrylic paint. I have deep black or iron oxide black, whatever works for you, whatever you guys have on hand. And I'm going to just put a little bit out on my palette, which is why I didn't put it out to begin with. But I'm going to take that and I'm going to take my angle brush. And I'm not mixing it with a glazing liquid just because I wanted to like really punch in those colors, right? So if I start building this up, it almost kind of transitions from that stump over here. So I'm not actually going to have any kind of like a differentiation. I'm just going to kind of let it blend together, right? And actually, I am realizing that this is a small brush. So we're going to get to the larger 18 flat. Also, brush sizes, guys. Try to use a brush that is slightly too big, just so you don't get super crazy details when you need to be kind of figuring things out and placing things.
Rhiannon asks if you can mix them with water to thin it a bit, or will it ruin the painting underneath?
Here's the deal. Yes, you can mix your acrylics with water a little bit. That it's not the painting underneath that I'm worried about, it's the adhesion. So when you mix water into your acrylics, you're kind of removing that stickiness of the paint. So the only time you can really ignore this rule is when you're painting on paper and the paper absorbs your pigments and kind of grabs it and holds onto it. I'm painting on a panel, so I don't want to do that because I need something to like really get my pigment stuck down on there, and that's what the acrylic polymer is doing. So if you mix water in, no more than 30%. That is the maximum you want to do when you're painting on a non-porous, non-absorbent surface. So yes, you can mix them in. Just be aware of you don't want to get too crazy with the water because you still need them to stick. But if you've ever had, if you ever mixed a bunch of water into your acrylics and you go to do layers and kind of build it up like a glaze like I'm doing here, and then you start lifting off the underlying layer, that's your problem. It's that adhesion is not quite there, so it's having an issue kind of really grabbing on. So I'm going to actually have a little bit of this color go up onto that branch and then stop. Again, even though this is a larger brush, I'm dragging my brush flat through my paint so that way it's still nice and sharp as I go this direction. So I'm still just kind of drawing. I'm not even going up to the edge of my tree branch, or my tree trunk, really. I'm going just to the inside. There's still a little bit of that purple kind of showing through. Right? Yeah, I think that's the darkness level that I wanted to go to. But I still have to build up kind of over here. So let's grab a bunch of this black and kind of dab it in. Might need more paint on my palette here. So I'm going to actually start doing wild brush strokes a little bit, just odd shapes kind of to indicate foliage that's not quite perfect, you know. And maybe as I start going up, I'm going to not cover everything. I'm going to do little dabs because it's really, really dark down here in the corner, and I want to make sure that I bring this darkness that's in this tree trunk also over here in my painting, because I want to make sure that that is repeated throughout my painting. Otherwise, it's going to look kind of funny. So it gets to about right here where I had stopped. Right, and I actually definitely need more of this darker color. Oop, and I'm actually unscrewing that. Let's not do that. Okay. So I'm going to make this fully dark over here in the corner. Solid area, right? Then about here is where I'm not being very nice to my brush at this point. I'm kind of just dabbing it and moving it at the same time. And that's how I get really interesting kind of shapes for foliage. So it's not giving me anything uniform, because if I just dabbed it the same way, I'm gonna get the same little, almost like impression, like if you were using a stamp. So by twisting my brush like this, I can get interesting kind of shapes. And that one tree branch is also really dark here, right? And then there's some the foliage that kind of goes up to the edge of this. Makes sense, right? I might need to go in with a smaller brush on that one too. Or pretend like there's more of a tuft of dark bushy area right there. And again, I don't have to have all these little blobs connect, because your brain already tells you, oh, that's a bush. It makes sense in the context of the whole thing, right? And at this point, also when I'm dabbing in brush, like bush kind of shapes, I don't do that flat thing with my brush. I actually dab it sideways to where I'm crunching my brush almost a little bit. This is where I start destroying my brush, because that's not very nice. And then I'm gonna just darken that just a little bit. Right? I think that makes sense. Yeah. I'm gonna actually darken a little bit here. And then I do want to talk about right here, because with my gradient in the previous one, I did not actually get pure white to that gradient, right? So I'm going to talk to you about how I kind of got this right after I get this darkness kind of into these tree trunks here, because this is also very, very dark. And you know what? I'm going to repeat a little bit of that darkness throughout this area, again, just to kind of keep the eye going around. And there's one little area right here, little tree stump that's just right up front in the foreground. Yeah, just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea, right? All right, so right here, after I painted the darkest tree and my orange trees, what I did, and I'll actually do this again, just to kind of give you an idea. I will do this with, actually, let me get my filbert brush. And this is why I really love the Black Swan as well, because even though my brush has, sorry, I need to pull it to where you guys can actually see it. My brush has a good snap to it, so it snaps back into shape, but it's also really, really soft. So it also gives me those really nice soft transitions. So I'm going to take a little bit of that cadmium yellow light, and this is how I kind of got it a little bit brighter right here. I'm going to take that, I think I got a little dot there, and I'm going to just glaze that in to this area. Now, if I need to, I'll get the majority of that pigment off on my brush and then kind of feather that, because that yellow that I have right there still has the glazing liquid in, so it's very, very transparent. And maybe I need this to be a little bit more yellow as well. Because there's also, if you look at the reference photo, there's something going on over here that's just off into the distance. You can't quite see it, but there's an indication of something happening. Maybe I want a little bit more orange. I think I want it a little bit, yeah. So that cadmium yellow deep, just to kind of darken that orange just a little bit. And that's how I got that white in there. So I did the exact same thing with the pure titanium white. And then I kind of mixed in with the titanium white and a little bit of that cadmium yellow light and made a lighter yellow and started glazing that in. right? And actually, let me rinse off my brush. I'm getting all of the pigments off. And clean brush, it is wet, so I'm gonna kind of just feather that out, right? Yeah, I think that's good. And you can see I did the same thing with the orange here, where I started indicating that there was more bushes and things happening back there. And I didn't get really dark with that burnt sienna as well. I just left it the bright orange just to indicate that there's some kind of foliage, but it is so close to that light that it is just, you can't see any kind of full structure. It's just like a really light indication that it's there. And then the further away I'm getting away from that light source, the darker I'm getting up here in that like purpley dark tones, right? So how are we doing on time? I feel like we are pretty much right there.
About 2 minutes over.
Okay, so that was painting a sunset, a swampy sunset. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you learned lots. Do we have any quick questions before I officially sign off?
Nola was wondering about your choice to use a black instead of make a black.
A black instead, oh, instead of make, I thought you said,
sorry, I said
I
that
thought
really
you
fast.
said mega black. I was like, I use deep black, like, isn't that mega black? Okay, so I was using a very limited palette. I did that specifically because I wanted to limit my choice of colors here. I find that when I have every single color available to me and that I can just grab whatever I need that's already pre-made, my color theory kind of that I've worked so hard to gain over the years tends to go out the window, and I forget all the things that I've learned. So by limiting my color palette, I am forced to kind of make those colors. But the reason why I didn't make a black, because I kind of did with that cobalt blue and the burnt sienna. That's how I usually make my black. I usually use an ultramarine blue though. I did not have an ultramarine blue, I had cobalt. So when I mixed those two together, I got a really dark kind of color over here. And then I added in a little bit touch of the purples down here. You can see this is my cobalt blue with the burnt sienna, and then this is kind of where I'm adding in those mauves. So there's a slight difference here. The reason why I wanted to add in that black and the reason why I wanted to darken this right here is because this is my darkest area. And when I got to the stage of where I was at right before I started painting in that black here, I realized there's not a whole lot of contrast between this right here and this up here. And I wanted it pushed further. So that's one of those things that 9 times out of 10, I don't use black in my paintings. I mix a black because I can usually use my darkest dark and I'm good. But when it comes to pushing your values, if you realize that something is still slightly off, bring in a black. This is why black is not a wrong color to use. It's not a bad color to use. I tend to just not use it because I've gotten in the habit of not doing so. But when the time calls for it, I will absolutely grab it because it is such a strong tool. Just like using white for your highlights, but because I have this as black now, next to that bright, bright, bright white, your eye goes straight there. And that's that contrast that I really, really wanted. That's why. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes. I feel like there's more.
1 or 2 actually.
Yeah.
If the painting underneath has the retarding liquid mixed in, will it retard the drying time on a layer above it?
Well, as long as the acrylic is dry, no. The drying retarder will only affect wet paint. That's a really good question, actually, because you would think, like with oils, sometimes it affects the upper layers. With acrylics, once they cure, they are permanent, and that's it. That drying retarder is it's an acrylic polymer, so it won't move on you. It's permanent once it's dry, once it cures. Any other ones?
And then, I think you answered this
like
before,
there's
but do you ever mist the paints?
Do I ever mist the paints? I do if I get to the stage where I'm just like right now, my paints, and I feel so bad because I have so many paints. I'm probably going to take all this paint and just go slap it on a canvas to tone them just so you guys know, I do not like wasting paint, but right now I can see that they're starting to become a bit of a film on them. So at this stage, if I were to want to continue to work on this for a period of time, but I want to go take a break or I need to have a layer dry or something, yes, I'm going to mist it and then go feed my dog or go get a snack, go to the bathroom, kind of walk around my neighborhood for, you know, a quick refresher. And then when I come back, I have fresh eyes on this. My paint's still wet. So yes, I will mist my acrylics. Again, don't get them sopping wet, just a light mist. Actually, that aqua mist bottle is beautiful for it because it's such a fine mist and you don't get overly saturated because it's just a lot of water and it's super easy to use. Any more? All right, so that was our time, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. As you can see, I didn't exactly copy it perfectly from one to the other. I was hoping to actually work on this a little bit more, but we are limited in time. I did enjoy myself. I hope you guys learned lots, and thank you so much for joining me. And make sure you join me next week because we are going to have a guest artist in. I'm so excited. We are going to actually be talking about atmosphere in landscape with the Winsor & Newton, the brand new 8 colors that are coming out. So I'm so excited. It's going to be an awesome show. But that was everything. Oh, if you guys did this, please post it. I want to see what you did. I hope to see all of your paintings. But if you want to post it, go to the Facebook, Jerry's Live Facebook group. It is free for anybody to join. All you have to do is answer that one security question, because if you don't answer the security question, you are deemed a robot and we're not allowed to let you in. So, but if you want to actually just share it directly with me and you don't want to post it for everyone to see because you're a little bit shy, that's okay. You can send it directly to me. I have my Facebook page, which is Emmy, host of Jerry's Live, and you can chat with me directly there. Also, if you have any questions about this process or if you just are kind of stumped on something, feel free to ask me. I will be happy to answer those questions. Also, if we didn't get to any of your questions that were in the chats while we were going through the show, I always make sure to go back and respond to those. So I will get back to you guys. But that was the show, and I hope to see you next week. Bye!